Catching criminals is no easy job.
Making it so rescue.
But it's even harder when the criminal is a cop turned bad.
He liked having power and authority and status and a uniform.
When the police officers who were sworn to protect us turned to rape,
she was actually meeting a monster.
Murder.
What happened in those minutes or moments or seconds where he chose to go and get a weapon?
Robbery.
He knows where the money is, he knows where the drugs are.
And even blackmail and poisoning. All just to get what they want. In this series, I'm enlisting the help of 3 experts.
That man should stay behind bars for the rest of his life.
2 senior officers who've put hundreds of offenders behind bars.
He was in such a lofty position that he thought he was untouchable.
And a psychologist who can analyse the criminal mind.
He's a narcissist. He doesn't feel remorse.
In this series, I'll be investigating why some cops put themselves on the wrong side of the law, abuse their power, and commit horrific crimes. Police officers can turn bad for many reasons. But this is one of the most bizarre cases I've ever heard. This cop's crimes involve food contamination, blackmail, and threats to harm children. August 1988, and a parcel arrives on the managing director's desk at Pedigree Pet Foods, one of the biggest selling pet food manufacturers in Britain. Inside is a demand for £100,000. If the company doesn't pay up, a blackmailer is threatening to poison pets across the UK using contaminated tins of Pedigree Chum dog food. Along with the letter is a tin of the dog food with a claim that it's laced with highly toxic and virtually undetectable chemicals. This blackmailer means business. The horrified managing director immediately calls the police. I'm calling in former Detective Chief Superintendent Sue Hill to tell me more about this sickening blackmail plot. The first thing the company did was get the tin they'd been sent tested.
When they tested the product, they knew that it had been poisoned. The blackmailer said in the letter, if you don't supply £100,000 a year for the next 5 years to me, I will continue to poison your Pedigree Chum supplies.
Wow.
They signed it off, the letter off with Romeo and Juliet, which led then people to believe this is not one person, this could be 2 involved in this blackmail.
Say if I got a tin of dog food and opened it, wouldn't I be able to smell it or see the difference?
It was odourless, you couldn't smell it, you couldn't see it, but it was poisonous. So therefore you could feed your dog and not know what you're doing.
Wow. The blackmailer's demand is neatly typed, and their lethal work is immaculately disguised.
They drilled a tiny hole in the tin and the chemicals went through that and put the label back on it.
On the supermarket shelves, it would be impossible to tell the poison tins from the safe ones. You said that he left like a ransom letter. Could they not get any evidence from that?
The blackmailer was very sharp and he typed the letter but then photocopied it. So there are no indentations that you wouldn't be able to find. Even if you found the typewriter, could prove that that letter came from that typewriter. This was a really sophisticated blackmail.
Forensically, the blackmailer hasn't left a shred of evidence. So how do you approach a case where the criminals have so carefully covered their tracks? I'm asking former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves, who has over 30 years' experience investigating complex crimes.
In terms of investigating a blackmail, the first thing you want to do is to identify who that individual is, whether it's one person or others involved. They have no clue what he's going to do next. So they had to do what you would expect them to do, was say, okay, how are we going to contact you? Well, he's already indicated to them in his letters, basically saying, I've got accounts which I've set up, and you will be paying them into those accounts. And those accounts were related to Nationwide, to Halifax, and to Abbey National.
Detectives find the blackmailers have set up bank accounts using false names and phony addresses. The accounts were opened 2 years before, in 1986, and the blackmailers have the cash point cards. So he's got them held to ransom. Did he pay?
They started by paying money into the account, but the police advice to them was important because if you think about it, the nationwide account and the Abbey National account, they have got so many different cash points around the country, but Halifax only had 900, whereas the others had probably double that amount. So they decided that they would focus on paying him just in the Halifax accounts, and he could only draw £300 at a time.
Sure enough, the blackmailers begin to withdraw the cash using Halifax cash machines, £300 at a time. Police are hoping to spot a pattern and find out where the mystery Romeo and Juliet are based.
But he wasn't just doing it in one particular area. He was making sure he was doing it in completely different areas. He went as far afield as up in Scotland, as far down as Wales. Now, if you imagine, which one are they going to be able to think he's going to go to next?
So for him, he's won, hasn't he? I mean, he's getting his money, he's got them held to ransom, they don't know where he's going to be.
Yeah, to start with, yes.
While the police try and track down the culprits as they withdraw the money, the blackmailer is becoming increasingly frustrated and angry.
Well, he was absolutely infuriated because he wanted the money to be paid into 3 bank accounts. However, it only went into the Halifax.
And he could just then go and draw it out?
Well, yeah, absolutely, but he didn't want that. He wanted it spread across 2 other bank accounts as well, which give him more flexibility and more cash point machines across the country. So what happened then, he actually poisoned tins of dog food and put them into a supermarket in Basildon. He'd really upped the ante.
After receiving a warning, on December the 5th, 1988, police swoop in on the supermarket and clear the shelves of pedigree chum. Scientists discover several tins have been spiked with poison.
Nobody knew how much food was out there, how much he'd poisoned. And you know, this person now who said they threatened to do it, they've now carried out the threat.
Like you said, you don't know how many. One is too many because you could think they're all contaminated. So it just causes panic.
And if you're in charge of an investigation like that, you can't take chances and you can't take risks because you just don't know. And you could be thinking, oh, you know, it's all bravado, he's not going to do it again. But actually, that's on your head and you're responsible. And, you know, we all love our dogs, we all love our pets.
Police asked Pedigree to keep the threats a strict secret. But then, in early December 1988, the blackmailers crank up the pressure with another letter. Next time, they say, it will be razor blades. And the great British public will announce to the media that your products are being interfered with. Investigators are getting desperate. It's time to set a trap for the blackmailers.
The police make another decision. They say, okay, why don't we try and put some CCTV at some designated cash machines and just see if we are strike lucky, we find something, him doing something. Those were done at random, but based on whatever information they had available as to what cash machines he's going to.
It was a long shot, but on the night of December 23rd, 1988, it paid off. Police had their first glimpse of the blackmailer. But he was wearing a crash helmet and gloves so he wouldn't leave fingerprints. It seemed this dangerous blackmailer was always one step ahead. It's December 1988, and police are hunting sophisticated blackmailers who are poisoning Pedigree Chum pet food. They say if the company doesn't pay £100,000, they will plant many more contaminated tins in supermarkets all over the UK. Police have one crucial lead. The blackmailer was caught on camera at a cash point in Ipswich, but as ever, he was one step ahead of the police. He was wearing a crash helmet and gloves. I'm asking former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves whether the grainy image could lead police to the criminal.
The team would have been elated at this point.
So they couldn't get any fingerprints or anything?
No, he was forensic conscious, and he'd have been wearing gloves. If you remember when he was using the typewriter, he then sent a copy of it. So he knew he wasn't going to leave any finger marks or anything like that there, no.
Look how grainy the footage is. You can see the quality in the 80s just isn't what we have now.
Well, that's what the police officers had to work with then. Well, it tells them a lot, because at least we know that this is the suspect, but they were going to need much more than that.
At this point, the blackmailers have netted £18,000 from their crimes, and their existence and the CCTV footage has been kept secret from the public.
And then, to add insult to injury, he then goes quiet for about 3 months. He doesn't do any transactions, doesn't do anything for 3 months. So then again, the investigators are asking themselves, how is it that we know we've got footage of him, and all of a sudden it's gone quiet? They are now beginning to ask themselves this question quietly. Is there a leak within the investigation team?
Ah, I understand.
Yeah. Is information being inadvertently passed to someone who is then using that information?
Police are at a loss, and they're still no closer to catching the blackmailer. To avoid mass panic, officers have kept the poisonings a secret for 7 months. But all that is about to change. March 1989. An anonymous letter lands on the desk of the managing director of Heinz Foods. The blackmailers, Romeo and Juliet, have struck again, and this time the threats are truly chilling. He's willing to harm people's pets, doesn't care as long as he gets his money.
Well, it gets a lot worse than that. He then sends a ransom note and he starts poisoning baby food.
Hang on. He's not actually, he's threatening, he's not actually going to poison baby food, surely?
He did. He sent a ransom note and said, if you don't pay me more money, then what I'm going to do, I'm going to poison Heinz baby food.
As before, the blackmailer wants £100,000 per year for 5 years, or they'll contaminate Heinz products. The police know from bitter experience that this blackmailer means business.
He's got the taste for the money now. He's only getting £300 a day from the pedigree chum ransom, so now he's at the ante. He wants Heinz to pay him as well, and he wants them to pay him over 8 bank accounts, so he's got more opportunity. He's becoming more greedy.
Greedy for money, but he's willing to put babies' lives at risk.
Unbelievable, you can't. I mean, bad enough with your pets and your dog food, but now vulnerable little children, Heinz baby food, glass, caustic soda, and razor blades.
See, I know what he's thinking. You love your pets, how much you love your kids? How much are your kids worth for safety? How much are you going to pay me?
And in fact, also, though, I'm seeing it as an investigator. You're in charge of that investigation, and now he's going to try and poison and potentially kill children. So now you're still trying to catch him. You don't know who they, you don't know who they are, and you've still got no idea. And that is the problem.
With babies' lives at risk, Scotland Yard step in and take over the investigation. This time, the blackmailer demands Heinz open 8 bank accounts on his behalf and pay the ransom money in. For Howard Groves, this was the perfect opportunity for police to catch their man.
He would have to collect certain cards that would be used for the machines, and therefore he had to go to a mailing address for those things to be collected. Yep. So what do you think would have probably the police would have been thinking about now? If these things are going to be delivered to an address?
Well, they can trace where these are going to go, and they can have someone surveil them and find out who's picking these up.
There you go, there you go. And that's exactly what happened. They thought, okay, we know the addresses they've got to go to, so we're going to plot up these addresses.
Yep.
And what do you think happened next?
Well, I presume he didn't turn up and pick them up.
Well, there you go. He didn't turn up. So, yet again, the inquiry team are thinking, he's not taking the bait. He's not coming near it.
The blackmailer had second-guessed the country's best detectives yet again. It was beginning to look like he had inside information. Then, 2 weeks after the ransom letter landed at Heinz, the thing detectives had been dreading finally happened.
He actually put caustic soda and razor blades and glass fragments in tins of baby food and put them on the shelf.
They actually went on the shelf?
He actually did it. He actually carried the threat out.
It's not long before the blackmailer's twisted work is spotted.
Teresa Murphy's daughter nearly ate pineapple dessert containing glass. She says she checked the vacuum seal before opening the jar and says her child was lucky.
So far, everybody's been lucky. It's been found before the babies have had it. Next time, it could be smaller pieces of glass, so babies should die.
And what could have happened to your little one if she'd had it?
It would have ripped her insides open. She would have died.
The blackmailer is planting lethal objects in the food of innocent babies. One Heinz jar is found to contain enough poison to kill several children. Sue explains to me how he did it.
Well, they take it off the shelf, take it away, and put the poison into the baby food, and then underneath heat up the bottom of the baby food, because if you remember, on the top of the baby food, it used to be a little blip, and then once he heated it, it would suck it back down, it would look it's not contaminated.
So that means it hadn't been opened before?
Very clever if you think about it. That lid would then be contained, and it looked like it hadn't been contaminated, so anyone that picked that up, they think they were safe and feed the baby.
Wow, they were clever.
It's like a ticking time bomb every time someone went to pick up baby food.
Sometimes a warning is left inside the product, but a full-blown nationwide panic is underway.
So can you imagine at the time, you know, people are going to buy their baby food and 5 children were injured, 5 children were hospitalised.
But the fact is, it's not just a threat, it's the fact he went and did it. I mean, imagine if that's your baby and then it ends up in hospital because of this man.
One particular victim's mother said when she started heating the baby food, it started boiling like a witch's cauldron, and she knew there was something wrong with that food.
Suddenly, the weekly shop is a minefield. Every baby product on the shelves is potentially suspect, and frightened parents are desperate to spot which items might be contaminated.
The manufacturers say that customers should check the lids of baby food in the shops. If the safety button is flat, then that means that the product's fine. But if the button makes a popping noise, it means that the seal has been broken and that someone has opened the jar.
That ITM reporter was Simon Marks. I'm meeting him in London to find out how big of a story it was at the time.
It was absolutely huge, and I think it's really important to remember that at the time, the country was feeling really brittle. You'd had a whole series of disasters, headline-grabbing disasters that had taken countless lives. The Zeebrugge ferry disaster, the Piper Alpha oil rig explosion, Pan Am 103 blowing up over Lockerbie, Scotland. And if there was one thing that people assumed they could count on, it was that their baby food was safe. And then suddenly they wake up in the middle of 1989 with that history of disaster behind them, and they discover that not even baby food could be counted on any longer.
At the Heinz factory in Wigan, pressure is mounting. There are calls for the company to withdraw millions of its products.
You had families at home who were being told that before you serve your baby food to your child, pour it into a bowl, go through it carefully, make sure there's no broken glass, pins or other elements of poison in there. That created panic with families. But the manufacturers knew there was nothing wrong with the product. The only problem were with those jars that the extortionist had purchased, taken away from the shop, filled with razor blades and broken bits of glass and pins, sealed the lid and put them back into the supermarket shelf.
With panic sweeping the country and reputations on the line, the police go public.
The government has acknowledged that a blackmailer is at work. As supermarkets across the country checked their stocks of Heinz and Cow & Gate products, more cases of contamination were reported nationwide. Home Office Minister John Patton was asked who could be behind the extortion.
Someone or some people who are very evil, very demented, and determined to try to cause maximum distress by preying on the fears of parents for the most vulnerable people in our society.
It was massive news.
The company have to take a lot of those items off the shelves. So they take off somewhere in the region of about 100 million items off the shelf. They have to then repackage another 30-odd million, and they were probably losing about 35 million.
Oh, wow. And Heinz are none too happy about the lack of progress in the investigation.
If you think of it, withdrawing the product does not solve the problem, because this man can be back tomorrow, next week, or next month. The only thing that's going to solve this problem is catching him.
And the Heinz managing director was right. Soon, the blackmailer was back with an even more outrageous demand for money, and the police seemed no closer to catching him. It's April 1989, and the mastermind behind a sophisticated blackmail campaign is poisoning baby food and putting contaminated products on supermarket shelves. And they won't stop unless thousands are deposited into separate bank accounts. 5 babies have already been hospitalized, and a full-blown panic is underway.
Last Saturday, metal was found in yoghurt in Gillingham and dessert in Sheerness, and glass was found in Maidstone. New cases today in Edinburgh, Blackpool, York, Lincoln and Luton have heightened the fears of parents everywhere.
The baby food manufacturers receive a new letter from the blackmailer, and this time he wants more money, a lot more.
Shows you the callousness of him, because at that point he has created mayhem, and he goes, okay, I tell you what, give me £2.5 million and it will stop.
What, just 2.5 million straight out?
Give me £2.5 million and it will all go away. We'll stop.
Heinz refuses to pay, and instead offers a £100,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the blackmailer. The result is hundreds of letters, and one in particular stands out, written in the unmistakable style of the extortionist.
The senior investigators officers say to themselves, we suspect the blackmailer and the person now trying to claim the reward as the informant are one of the same.
Right.
Yeah, and they were right when they made that decision.
Journalist Simon Marks says this was a turning point in the investigation.
The extortionist started making careless mistakes. Law enforcement sensed that he might be one of them because he was using expressions that were largely known within the law enforcement community but wouldn't have been known to regular people on the street. So at one point he was talking in a letter about the need to involve a third party, and he referred to that third party as a patsy. You know, unless you were a particular fan of crime drama, you wouldn't necessarily have known that phrase, but it was commonly used by police. And that was the thing that immediately twigged them to the idea that they might be investigating a former member of their own force.
Police are starting to think the culprit could be an ex-police officer, but after 9 months, their only lead is a grainy image at a cash point. So they decide to take a gamble. To try and gain a fingerprint, they program the cash machines the blackmailer is using to withdraw the money to swallow one of the cards. The blackmailer's response is swift and furious.
So this is the ransom letter. We're about to return with a vengeance. Next time it'll be potassium cyanide in your tamper-proof jars. If we are here to be prosecuted for murder, we might as well deserve it. But we are confident we will never be caught.
And he signed it Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet.
He wants national panic because it'll force the hand of the people to say, right, just pay him, because if we don't, no one's going to even trust any of our products anymore.
He had a grip on this, and he knew how to execute that plan. And at all costs, he didn't care. He's now so reckless. I want that money, and I'm going to do this. And woe betide you, you're in charge. What are you going to do? Are you going to pay him or risk someone's life?
I want to know what sort of person blackmails on this scale, and what psychologist Serena Simmons makes of the letter. An infant's death will be just another statistic as far as we are concerned. What does that tell you?
I think that's probably one of the truer statements off of that letter, as in I do think that's how he felt. It was irrelevant.
Really?
Yes, because you don't contaminate food without knowing that that is a genuine risk. So when he contaminated the food, there was a genuine risk that someone could be hurt. Remember, children were hurt.
Yeah.
There are often some similarities between blackmailers. So often you find with someone who's blackmailing, particularly a corporation or company, is they have some affiliation with that place. And maybe it's that they've taken umbrage with them. You might see, if you look in their past, that something's happened that they perceived as being negative, and so it's almost like a form of revenge. But the reason this is interesting is I don't believe the target was the food companies per se, it was actually the police. They are actually attacking someone that they have a connection with, and so in this case it is the police force.
What makes you think it was a police force and not just for money from the food companies?
I think it's because there's evidence when you look at the case that he always wanted to feel superior, and it's almost a case of, again, you know, this is what's been done in the past, but I'll do it better than that. You won't find me out.
So it's basically saying, you didn't see me before, but you'll see me now.
Yes, yeah, I'm going to be in the spotlight, and you won't figure out it was me all along.
Since going public about the blackmailer, police are swamped with thousands of calls a day. Journalist Simon Marks recalls a sense that things were getting out of hand.
It did create the panic that both the company and the police had feared. Right. So it led to an extraordinary array of copycat cases and of parents pursuing claims that their children had been poisoned, partly because some of them thought there was going to be an opportunity to cash in later on. Yeah. So it didn't, at the end of the day, yield any particularly useful information that helped the investigation. If anything, it bogged the investigation down, because when you had thousands of people calling in or other threats were being made against manufacturers, it only served at the end of the day to make the investigation that much more complicated. That investigation by police cost the country £3 million, a lot of money in those days. When Heinz took all their baby food ultimately off the shelves and destroyed it, that cost the company £32 million. Oh. The extortionist was only paid £32,000. So the cost of the crime in raw terms was of a massive magnitude compared to what was actually paid in an effort to catch the extortionist.
Hundreds of police officers were now working on the case, with nothing to show for it but one grainy image. To find out what police decided to do next, I'm asking former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves.
Well, the investigators would be mapping every single opportunity where he drew cash. So you can see the pins are representing the different cash machines that he would have visited.
So he's had to travel all that way just to draw money out?
And that's why they concentrated in the south, because that's where the majority of them take place. But you can see he was going one opposite end of the country to the other and up again north.
But mostly?
Most of them were in the south. So that's why they took the calculated gamble that they were going to concentrate most of their resources in this area. And that wasn't a bad decision to have made, because if you were to go to one of these, there's no chance. It's highly unlikely he was going to go back there again.
Police started watching a number of society branches, but he had started growing lazy and was making most of his withdrawals in London. That was to be his downfall.
Police called the next step Operation Agincourt, targeting 15 of the cash points in the south of England that the blackmailer used most often.
We're going to put officers inside the premises, we're going to put officers outside waiting for any information. And the computers were programmed in such a way that once the blackmailer pressed the fourth PIN number, digit, it would alert the computer and it would give them an idea very quickly of where that was happening.
The police teams settled down to an old-fashioned stakeout. And it wasn't long before the first alert came through.
Whilst they're in one of the offices upstairs, it pings after the fourth digit is put in, and it's actually the branch where they are, and it's downstairs.
Wow.
But by the time they get downstairs, he's gone, and the only thing that's left is a till receipt.
It's a major blow for the teams. They've missed their man by a matter of seconds.
So that would have deflated the team.
Yeah.
And as the SIO, you've got to build them back up and say, okay, come on, let's carry on.
We're getting closer.
They set a date for them to do a couple of operations. And on the day when they're doing the operation, their disaster struck. There was some maintenance work being done, and the maintenance people cut through the cable for the mainframe for the computers, so it's down. They couldn't do anything. You couldn't think of anything worse. The senior investigating officers decide, you know what, we're going to still carry ahead. We're still going to plot up where we think he may go.
It's October 1989, and in Enfield, North London, police are staking out a cash machine.
So the officers are sitting, the special branch officers are sitting up in the car park, and they see the vehicle, this vehicle come in. It's late at night. Somebody gets out of the vehicle, walks, starts to put a helmet on. Wow. Dear me, could this be our man? What are the chances of somebody just getting out of the car, puts on the helmet and starts to walk towards the cash machine? Gets to the cash machine, puts in his card, tap, tap, out of order. So the officers wait, and as he's walking back to the car, they then approach him and say, "Police, can we ask why you got a helmet on?" "Oh, well, because it's raining." And I think,
"Helmet because it's raining? I've got an umbrella."
But hey, what else can he say?
"Well, he should have come on a bike. I'd have come on a motorbike."
So he's got the helmet on. The officers obviously do the right thing. They stop him, search him, and bingo, the card. He gets arrested. And as the SIO, I could imagine you getting a phone call saying, "God, are you sitting down?" "Yeah." "Guess what? Bingo, we got him."
When the helmet comes off, it's one Rodney Whichelow, a recently retired detective sergeant in the regional crime squad. The police's hunch was right. The blackmailer who has caused mayhem and spread fear and panic is indeed a bent copper. October 1989, and after 14 months of fruitless searching for a blackmailer who has been poisoning baby and pet food, police have finally arrested retired police officer Rodney Whichelow. The 42-year-old former detective sergeant was stopped by police staking out a cash machine and found to be carrying one of the known bank cards used by the blackmailer. After more than a year of panic and fear amongst the public, police are convinced they've finally found their man. More than 30 years later, former Detective Superintendent Sue Hill still remembers this moment.
Everyone was working on this. Everybody was out, and it was really big news. And of course, while everyone was doing the surveillance, you had other crimes that you couldn't investigate because you're kind of prioritising. And if you can think, if you're in charge of that investigation, you've got these crimes going on, but over here you've got someone who's poisoning the country. So I remember it, and when he got caught, it was like, oh, thank goodness.
Wow. And it was somebody who they worked with. That must have been a right kick in the teeth.
Oh, absolutely. When you think you're not going home, surveillance, long hours, and you actually find this man has been working with you. It's the worst feeling ever. Someone you trusted has put, you know, babies' lives at risk, or dogs at risk. Do you think you could do that for greed?
Whilst Whichelow was being questioned, police searched his home.
When the police searched Whichelow's address, they found caustic soda, a portable telephone, and drills.
Along with the typewriter, it was physical evidence that linked Whichelow directly to the contamination carried out by the blackmailer. And the mobile phone records yielded key information about Whichelow's whereabouts when the cash was being collected.
Back in the day, when you had a phone, you would be able to look through bills and look through his call data and see who he'd been calling and who'd been calling him. When he was making those withdrawals from the cash point machines, there would have been call data on his phone as well, so that kind of corroborated where he was.
Police are now sure they have the man behind one of Britain's biggest blackmail campaigns, and he's a retired copper. Former Detective Chief Inspector Howard Groves remembers Rodney Whichelow as a respected and experienced detective.
I actually was one of his constables many years before that.
You knew Rodney Whichelow?
Yeah. When I was a budding detective in the 80s, I would report to him as one of the junior constables waiting to be a detective, and he was very good at his job. It was like a father figure to us. You know, we'd go to him. If we were planning operations, he'd say, okay, we're going to do a burglary operation tomorrow or whatever. We need a warrant. Somebody has to go to the court and apply for the warrant. He'd show us how to fill in the warrant form, the information required. He would show us how to fill in our duty sheets, showing what we're doing every day. And he was calm, mild-mannered, but very, very bright.
I want to know more about Wichelow, the outwardly decent police officer who planned an almost perfect blackmail by poisoning.
Wichelow was born in 1947. He was a very, very clever young man. He excelled in maths, physics and chemistry. He gave up his job in the chemical industry and joined the police.
Wow.
So he had access to police databases, obviously. He had good skills, knowledge of other criminals, and also how criminal networks work, how they launder their money, and how you can get away with it, and opening bank accounts. So he had all these skills of a criminal, and he went on to use them in the blackmail.
And Wichelow wasn't just your ordinary beat copper. He was a highly skilled detective. There was no signs then of him being a criminal or red flags?
When you think that he actually worked on what was called the Regional Crime Squad, and they only dealt with major crime, organized crime, and normally the cream of the crop. These individuals are seasoned investigators. They understand surveillance. They understand the tactics that people will use to blackmail others. So you're not just going to get your average constable, detective constable on the team. There's normally officers who've been in the police force for years. They know how it works. And he was one of those officers.
Now, his former colleagues would have to prove that one of their most seasoned detectives was the mastermind behind the infamous baby food blackmail plot. October 1990, and the trial of Rodney Wichelow begins at the Old Bailey.
This was definitely not an open and shut case. He covered his tracks really well, and even to the point that, you know, his colleagues couldn't believe that he'd done this. He pleaded not guilty, and he did everything in his power to get away with it.
Wichelow is charged with blackmail, making threats to kill Heinz customers, and contaminating food. In court, the prosecution said it was his police training which inspired his potentially lethal crimes, after he'd studied a previous blackmail case.
Wichelow knew, and he was privy to information that Joe Public wouldn't have been privy to, because the judge said at the time details of this offence would not be allowed out because they didn't want copycats. He kept this knowledge, and he planned this crime meticulously. This wasn't just a spur of the moment. He set up all these bank accounts, and he had planned and prepared the execution of this blackmail over many months and probably years.
For almost a year, he eluded the police, whilst gaining inside information from former colleagues who was working on the investigation.
When Wichelow retired, he still kept in contact with his colleagues on the Regional Crime Squad. Meet them in a pub, it would be a social occasion, so they wouldn't be thinking anything of it. It would just be mates meeting up. So he had an opportunity to find out if they knew anything about the case. And he probably was told inadvertently by them that they were looking at that particular cash machines on a particular night.
He's one step ahead then. If he's in the room listening to and finding out where they are on this case, they can just go, well, I won't go there because that's where they're looking.
Yeah.
The inside information explained how and why Wichelow had disappeared for months after the crucial and secret CCTV footage was first captured. So he's obviously heard, because he's in the police force himself,
yes,
that they've got this footage, or grainy footage it may be, and he's thinking, I need to lay low for a little bit.
Exactly. You don't need to be a brain surgeon to work that one out. If you're in his position, you think, I'll lie low for a while, let the dust settle before I resurrect myself again and decide to move on.
Right. Wichelow's trial lasted 10 weeks. The jury deliberated for 16 hours before returning a verdict.
Rodney Wichelow will spend much of his 17-year jail sentence apart from other prisoners for his own protection. He was convicted on 11 counts, including blackmail, a threat to kill, and contaminating food tins.
He was cleared on 4 counts of contaminating food with intent to cause grievous bodily harm, because he placed warnings inside the items he tampered with.
He got 17 years imprisonment.
Right, 17 years.
I don't think that's enough when you think about the fear that you put into everyone in the country and the fact the amount of resources that were used to try and catch him. And he was charged with blackmail and threats to kill and threatening to kill children. In my view, that's not enough.
Right up to the bitter end, Wichello refused to admit his crimes. And psychologist Serena Simmons thinks he would have been shocked at the guilty verdict.
I believe he thought he would get away with it. I don't think he thought he would ever be caught. He started to plan this crime 2 years before he retired. And I think it gave him a great deal of satisfaction to sit back during that time and plan this behind the scenes, all the while feeling superior with the people that he was working with. And so I think he wanted to kind of go off into the sunset, leaving this case behind, leaving the carnage behind, so that people would always wonder who that person was, who had done it, and he could kind of sit back and gloat.
It's hard to get your head around. Wichello's fellow officers struggle to find a motive for a crime of that magnitude.
He got to the rank of sergeant, detective sergeant, and the anecdotal information is such that he felt that he should have been working at a higher rank. And in other words, sergeant wasn't good enough for him. It didn't look like he was going to get promoted, and therefore he decided, well, he might as well just leave. He may have thought to himself, you know what, I've learned all this information about this particular blackmail. I'm going to show you, who haven't supported my desire to get promotion, I'm going to show you just how good I am. You people who worked around me, you're the ones who are going to have to explain how you didn't catch me. So you never know what was going through his mind.
But yeah, but there's a lot of people who would be saying, yeah, but he was willing to harm or maybe kill babies for his own personal gain.
Yes, his own personal gain was greed, money.
After serving half of his 17-year sentence, Rodney Wichello was released from prison in 1998 and gave an interview to a national newspaper. I've got the cutting here. See if there's anything interesting that stands out to you about what he says.
It happened, I was convicted. I have served my time and paid my dues. So interesting that he uses that phrase, it happened, like it's nothing to do with him. It's something that happened to him.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Not, I did this and I was convicted. It happened. He wants separation from it. He wants people to just basically put it aside and let him go about his business. It was something that happened to him. He didn't orchestrate it. So that's really interesting phrasing there. I'm trying to lead an honest life and I'm trying to avoid any publicity. So,
whilst doing an interview with the press?
While doing an interview with the press. Very interesting phrasing all throughout for me, but he's still not taking responsibility.
But Wichello did tell the newspaper, I have atoned. I would condemn anyone who commits such crimes. I am very, very sorry. How do you apologise to a nation?
He came very close to getting away with it. How long he would have gotten away with it moving forward is another story. You would find it difficult to commit that crime now.
Well, yeah.
Because of the CCTV, the phone data is even more enhanced now, so it would have been difficult to have done that.
This case changed the face of manufacturing.
Yes.
How to secure food products.
Yes. This case would have been studied to identify ways of counteracting anybody who decides to try to do. Because there's going to be somebody out there who will think I can beat Rodney Wichello at what he did.
This police officer thought he'd planned the perfect crime and banked on getting rich from it. Rodney Wichello caused a nationwide panic with threats to contaminate baby food and used his police knowledge to get away with it for months. But eventually, it was his own former colleagues that brought him to justice.